Hello, welcome to the Incubator, the Biology Jobology podcast. I'm your host, Will Olds, and our guest today is Dr. Nick Chisholm. He's a Harvard-trained physicist with experience in venture capital. He's currently a data scientist at gaming startup FACEIT. He will be discussing how to navigate your way through the VC and startup world. All right, Nick, what do you do now?
I currently work at data at a gaming company in London. Technically, I'm a data scientist.
So, how'd you get there?
So I spent a lot of time during undergrad working in research in labs, and then I lucked out and was able to go to Harvard for my PhD in applied physics. Here I worked studying small magnetic fields using defects in diamond at room temperature. So I was really lucky to be able to work on this type of project because it required a solid understanding of chemistry and also had applications in biology, which allowed me to get to know many different scientists across disciplines. But during that process, I began to feel a bit uneasy about the outlook in academia in terms of funding and just the way that academia was structured. So I decided to start looking for opportunities elsewhere. Primarily, I looked into medicine and finance. As time passed, I learned more and more, and I became increasingly convinced that industry was the best way to make a difference. I applied to business school thinking it was a long shot, but lucked out and got into Stanford's MBA program. Through this, I met some alumni, one of which offered me a summer internship as a data scientist at their VC firm, which then turned into a longer-term position. I ended up deferring Stanford's program for a year for personal reasons. I then left that firm to work for a startup they had invested in and that I had had some great interactions with, and now here I am.
What was it like working in the venture capital world?
It was interesting. So I didn't have a very typical role in my firm, or for any firm really. So I did some sourcing of potential companies for us to invest in. I also helped evaluate potential companies that we were thinking about investing in already previously, and also help to evaluate companies that we had already invested in. At the same time, I was able to help companies that we had already invested in to try to find people to help with their data problems, and then worked on our kind of internal data systems as well. So this was, as you can imagine, that's a bunch of different things that I was doing at once, which made it really interesting and exciting. So I thought it was a really great exposure to the startup world.
While you were at Harvard and Stanford, what did you do outside of the lab to get yourself in a good position for this world?
Well, so funnily enough, I was never really focused on even getting into this world, the VC or startup world. So I actually originally was just interested in understanding how baseball operations departments worked. And then I quickly realized that my biggest value add would be in understanding and interpreting data. So I began to teach myself how to code, as in not just hacking things together for working an experiment, but then I later took some more advanced courses at Harvard in data science and machine learning. I did a project with some of my students that I had been an RA for during my time as a PhD student, and we worked on a baseball analytics project, particularly for pitching. It may sound very cliche, but I really do think the best preparation is following your passions. It's just trying to gain a unique set of skills. So for me, I just love intuitively challenging quantitative problems. And by constantly applying the skill sets I acquired from solving those problems, I was able to figure out a way to apply those skills to the fields I wanted to explore.
I see, the baseball career is not really working out, but you can do the Moneyball analytics, so that's great.
Yeah, I kind of just decided it was a little less stable than I was hoping for. But yeah.
Sounds like you did quite a bit outside the lab. What would you say are the most important skills you learned in grad school?
Well, I would say that there are a ton, so I'll do my best to try to list some of the ones that I think are most important. So I think being self-disciplined and organized are important for both success in grad school and outside, and I think you'd be surprised at how rare those skills are in the real world. And I think independent research is such a good way to learn how to not only answer the questions your advisor or boss asks you, but also start asking the questions yourself without the need for your advisor or boss's input. This is huge in the startup world in particular because everyone is working so hard already that the less they have to babysit their employees, the better. I would also suggest taking the time to network with people outside of your specific discipline, and unfortunately for some people, outside of science.
So, a lot of people have trouble with networking. What are your approaches and tips?
Good question. So, um, I think I take a somewhat different approach than a lot of people actually. So, if I go to a conference, I actually only really talk to at most 3 or 4 people for any length of time. And I'm actually really happy if I come out of a conference, even if it's like the whole weekend, where I've made one strong connection. And so I don't believe in going to a conference or meeting a bunch of people and trying to just maximize the number of people that you make contact with. I think it's more important to cultivate, um, a deep connection with someone and actually talk to them about what they do, but also about who they are as a person in general. And I think that those types of relationships are far more likely to result in help with finding a job or just help in your career in the long run in general. It doesn't need to necessarily be someone that's going to help you tomorrow. It could be someone that helps you 5 to 10 years down the line. And I think it's also important to kind of try to choose people that actually you align with quite well. I mean, it's going to be hard to make those types of connections with people that don't have the same theses of the world as you do. So I think that's my approach, and so far I think it's been pretty successful.
So, I wanted to circle back to your career story. And you were talking about the grim outlook of academia and made you start thinking about industry. Obviously, you could do anything. Was there any experience that made you think, I might like industry? I might like going to this wild VC startup world?
Firstly, I think it's important to note that I wasn't very confident that I really wanted to go into sort of this more startup world. What I saw from the outside were, a bunch of people in these companies working together, trying to solve a problem that was important, and that a lot of people would end up taking on tasks that are not necessarily within their, domain of knowledge, and that, are kind of working hard to just try to get to that end goal. And that was something that I always really enjoyed during my PhD work. Um, so to me, I started to see industry as like a place that I might actually fit in quite well. And I also have started to sort of see that there are companies out there that are doing some really good work that I think will help to change the world in a more positive way. And so I think that we are just at the beginning of that. And I think that the positives of staying in academia in terms of being able to do your own work and really decide on what you work on, and be able to follow these sort of the pursuit of knowledge for positive impact, I think is starting to sort of trickle into industry. Maybe not in the same way, actually, maybe in a more efficient way in industry. And so I think it might be the right place to go if your end goal is, positive impact in the world.
So, how does the culture differ from academia?
So I think the the culture is highly dependent on where you're working. So by this I mean, not every VC and startup are the same, and I think the culture is very dependent on the management team. And to me, at least in my experience, this is very similar to academia, where your advisor and sometimes postdocs set the tone for everyone else. I would say though that it's less collaborative with other people. So, for example, like academia has a tendency to be very open, whereas VCs and startups are much more secretive, obviously to keep an edge in the market. But yeah, and so like kind of striking back to the previous point where you're not really necessarily in the pursuit of knowledge anymore, depending on where you're working, of course, but instead about making a profit or retaining customers or providing a positive impact in the world.
What's been the biggest challenge for you transitioning from the bench?
Um, I think my biggest challenge was learning how to communicate with people who don't understand what I do as much as I'm used to, which is a convoluted way of saying that. Um, well, if I put it in kind of perspective from PhD work, when you do research, you tend to work with people with similar backgrounds. Um, and so, for example, for me, I was an experimental physicist who worked with people not only who had a strong understanding of physics, sorry, but also AMO physics and even very specific knowledge of nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond. Contrast that to my position in both my roles thus far in industry, where I'm kind of the expert on data with few, if any, depending on the place, people to talk to data about in a way that's truly helpful for my understanding. Now, you can imagine you need to get that data out and across the company and really explain the insights you're making with management, but also you need management to be able to describe things to you so that you can have enough intuition to do your job properly. So there's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem, but there's just way more communication between people who don't do similar roles. And it goes both ways is essentially what I'm trying to describe. But I've personally been very lucky at my current location because they really understand the value of data and have actually tried to solve most of the problems that I'm solving right now and can understand just how difficult it is to solve those problems.
So, how have you been able to develop those communication skills?
I think a lot of practice. So, in particular in data, it's really important to ask a lot of questions. And I think it's difficult for people who are just starting off in industry, I think, to really ask questions a lot. And I mean, I think in research, it's actually easier to not ask as many questions. So if I remember like my advisor would maybe say something and I wouldn't quite understand it, but I would have at least a general idea and be able to go back and look up papers and read and figure it out on my own. In the startup world, I feel like there's not enough time to do something like that. There also may not be actually anywhere to go and find out that information. But also it's just not worth it. So it's much more valued to actually ask those questions and get a firm understanding, make sure that you're both on the same page. And so I think the best way for me to learn that was maybe to fail at it once and then realize, oh, I just need to understand that I don't have another location to find out this information. I just need to make sure continuously that everybody is on the same page. I know that's not a nice answer, but
It sounds like a very science answer, right? You fail a couple times, and then you realize how to optimize the conditions.
Yeah, that's probably about right.
How do you find job opportunities at startups?
Well, so I guess the easiest, lowest barrier to entry approach is to use a ton of websites. For example, I think AngelList is probably one of, if not the best to use, just to see who's hiring, etc. Another great method is just to try and find fast-growing startups that you believe in. So, this might mean that you go and you kind of try to what we call sourcing companies in venture capital. So you kind of look for companies that are growing really, really quickly, and see if they're looking to hire. So usually companies that are doing really well, making a lot of money, starting to hit profitability are hiring furiously. And the good thing about this is more than likely the way that you found that company was by thinking through the process of, there's this problem in the world. It needs to be solved. And this company has probably solved that problem. So you have also probably identified that as a problem, which means that your sort of way of thinking about the world is probably similar to theirs. And so I think that's a good way to figure out if you intellectually align with them, as well as them actually hiring people. But I think, again, the most important way to find job openings is through networking. I think everyone underestimates networking, which sounds crazy because everybody talks about networking all the time. But I think it is really important for being able to find jobs, but also to find the right one. So I think, for example, if you're interested in tech, you should go to a tech meetup or a conference for startups and just try to meet people. And I mean, not only does it let an employer get to know you before going through the interview process, but it also catches the startup or individual with their guard down, and you can get a good sense of what it's like to work for their company before you even step into the role. I think like there's no point in wasting your time in a job you hate or in a company whose culture you can't stand. So you may as well spend that time beforehand to figure out if it's a good match.
For startups, you mostly hear about stuff in the Bay Area and Boston. Are there any areas that you think are up and coming to look out for and maybe more of a force in the future?
So I would say Chicago and New York City are probably underrated. Um, Also great places to live. I also think Toronto and Vancouver are underrated. I'm Canadian, so I'm a little bit biased, but um, the, there's actually I can speak a lot about Toronto. I mean, there's a great engineering school nearby that actually a lot of graduates get hired for Silicon Valley posts, and a lot of them now are trying to start their own startup. So I think that will actually continue to grow, maybe the fastest out of those four I mentioned. The startup scene is getting pretty hot in London now. People are starting to work more. I don't know now that Brexit has gone through, um, but that so I think that actually could have a very large effect. Given that even the company that I work for currently is although founders are from Italy, so they would maybe not be moving to London if it were to happen at this point. So I'm not sure how that will affect them. People always say LA is an up and coming area. I'm not entirely convinced yet, but it seems like people are pouring a lot of money in there, so that also might be another one to look out for.
I'm just curious here. What's that based on? Is it upon the number of companies sprouting up out there, or just industry talk, and that's just the buzz?
Most of that is just from companies that I've heard of that are kind of starting to sprout out. Toronto, so some of them that there actually are already locations where you know where to find the startup like scene. So like in London, there's like a small area that has some nickname that I can't remember at this point. But it's like a some nickname similar to Silicon Valley. And Toronto has been known to be having like a nice little startup scene for a while. I just think that it's my prediction that that it's going to be starting to feed even more into itself just because of the talent here. Um, I think it's also because for example, a place like Toronto or Vancouver, you don't have a similar type of financial services based market there. Like the economy is not as centered around that. So I think that there's more room for growth. People will feel more likely to go and move to Toronto just to start their startup. Maybe more so than New York City, where there's a bunch of um, upper class people that drive up rents, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's just maybe some more room. Another one I should mention actually is I have heard. I have no idea why, but Florida seems to be having a good startup scene. So if you if you if you really want to live in Florida, I've seen a bunch of companies out there. I really don't know why, to be honest. I'm sure that there's a good reason. I think there are some really great state schools down there, so maybe that's why people just want to stay. But yeah, that is that is one to kind of look out for. Um, but yeah, I think basically all over too, like Orlando, Miami, etc. So I'm not sure, but yeah.
How is your work-life balance?
I feel like my work-life balance is similar to in graduate school. I think if you produce quickly, most people seem to be able to set their own hours within reason in the startup world. I tend to work long hours, but honestly, it's because I love my job and it makes me happy. And I'm also just really driven to make as large an impact as I can as early on as possible. So um, I think you would actually probably find it similar as long as you're producing, probably pretty similar to your PhD life, where a lot of it is self motivation.
Something that's famous in grad school is frustration. Do you find yourself as frustrated as you were in grad school?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say so. Every now and then there's like a problem that is difficult to solve, and I think you tend. I mean, maybe it's just my experience, but I feel like I actually tend to get settled with those more often than not. And I don't complain about it because I actually enjoy those problems. But because people know that you probably can solve them as as someone with a PhD, like you've done this before. Um, but those problems last on a much shorter time scale. So, you won't have gone are the days where you have a year of an experiment that doesn't work, for example. I mean, that's not only would nobody think that that's a reasonable thing to put you through, they also just don't have the time or the money to do that, to allow you to go through that. So um, there's much quicker turnover in projects, which I think makes it, it's nice. You get some instant feedback, and you also don't get stuck on anything for too long.
Because your foot is on the gas, so to speak, do you see a lot of burnout?
So surprisingly, I guess probably I have yet to see anyone actually burn out, and I think actually people at startups seem to be a little bit more aware than grad students as to when they'll start to burn out and take vacation before it happens. Uh, so I mean that's a big plus, I think. But I mean, with that in mind, I should say that I am currently in London, where vacation time is much more generous than in the U.S. So maybe people are just more willing to take it, but um, I don't see it that often. I actually am very leery of these of I think it becomes more of a problem when there's unlimited vacation policies, only because then it becomes a little bit more difficult to navigate. If you have a strict 2 weeks you can take vacation, I think it's easier to take, at least for me personally. Whereas with the unlimited, that basically means there's nothing written down. So it's not necessarily expected. So it's a little bit more difficult to figure out, I think, at the beginning, when am I able to take vacation? You kind of have to be a little bit more confident about being like, no, I need vacation. But otherwise, I don't think I haven't seen actually anyone burn out. So that's good.
It seems like in startups, people know when to take their vacation. What's the signal to them? I know from my own grad student experience, I worked until I basically couldn't move anymore, until I really couldn't physically keep working.
I think, I'm not even sure if there's a signal or if it's that a lot of people realize more that it's their job and not their whole life. Um, so maybe that harks back on the question of the work-life balance, where, I mean, at least in my experience in graduate school, a lot of people made grad school their life, their research their life. And at that point, it becomes like, well, I could step away and do something else, but either now there's nothing else to do because I put so much energy into this, or it seems actually daunting to step away, for a variety of reasons. Either because you don't want things to slow down, there's actually no one else to go pick up your work, um, et cetera, et cetera. It became much easier, for example, for me to go to Europe when I could ask my lab mate to just like run some experiments for me that I had basically already set up, and he could just do a couple things 10 minutes a day and really like kind of keep things going for me. Whereas I think in the startup world, it's a job. Like it's defined as a job, which makes it easier to kind of step away from. But also, as much as I say that, at times you're not always communicating with people that know exactly what you know, they can often just take over your work for you for a bit, pretty easily. And because things are moving so quickly and things need to get done, that will just happen. So I think there's a lot less guilt there. So I'm not even sure if it's that they identify better the timing, or if they're able to understand that their separate life from work is also important.
Lastly, what words of encouragement can you give young scientists?
Lots. So I think first and foremost, I don't think your PhD just doesn't define you. So you didn't get the results you were looking for and only published a paper or two or none at all. That's fine. And no one in industry really cares about your publications at all, really, unless you want to do research in industry, of course. I don't think anyone has ever asked me for my publication list, which seems a little crazy. But I think the absolute most important thing you should be focused on during your PhD is learning. And, I know, like, you should be producing results, and that's a great thing to strive towards. You should try to produce results, but that's more your advisor's goal than yours. You should be focused on learning, and it just so happens that you'll probably learn more if you produce results and publish them. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. My advisor, for example, was very serious about having all his experimentalists build an experiment from scratch. And I'm very thankful that I had the opportunity to build 3 different setups during my time in graduate school. That kind of experience, building something from nothing, is pretty irreplaceable. You get an idea for agile thinking and development processes. Most importantly, you learn how to take advantage of all the resources at your disposal and do something from start to end. And I think that skill, being an independent leader of a project that you can carry from beginning to end without having your hand held, will be the most important skill you have coming out of grad school. And I think the best part is that learning during your PhD is the right approach for both academia and industry. So you don't even have to choose between them while still setting yourself up for success in both. I think it's, at least in my field, I think it's way more important to get publications during your postdoc or postdocs than necessarily in your PhD. And finally, your PhD should be the hardest job you have. So it will be the time when you have to be the most malleable, both intellectually and personally. If you don't like a job in the future, you can quit and just get a new one. If you don't like your PhD and you're 3 years in, that's a much more difficult decision to make. So I think basically, you're already on the road to a place where the difficult times kind of lie behind you, or you're currently going through them, and things will get much more easy.
Well, I feel great that I've already conquered the hardest job I'll ever have.
Hopefully. But yeah.
All right. Thanks, Nick, for your insight.
No problem at all.
A big thanks again to Nick and to Protein Tech for sponsoring. And thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe and rate us on iTunes. See you next month.